Welcome to Lesson 1, Straight Line Depreciation. Our objectives are to understand the terminology associated with depreciation, to determine monthly depreciation under the straight line, and to calculate partial period depreciation. There are many methods to calculate depreciation. However, straight line is probably the most easiest and it's very commonly used. Here's 3 methods, and you can here the graphs for each. So you'll notice that straight line method is called straight line because it's a consistent amount of depreciation each year versus the decline balance method or the sum of integers method. And these are more exponential type functions. So in these two functions, you can see that there is an initial greater amount of depreciation in the first few years of life, and then it tapers off as we go, whereas straight line declines the same amount every year. So what is depreciation anyway? Well, depreciation is the amount that your vehicle declines in value over time. Things like cars and other types of assets will depreciate over time. They'll lose value over time, subject to wear and tear and as you use them, or technology makes it possible to have newer, better type items. But some items do appreciate, like real estate, land, homes. What we're going to do, though, is look at straight line depreciation. And as we said, it's charged uniformly, which means evenly, over the life of an asset. In order to calculate straight line depreciation, we also have to be aware of something called salvage value. Salvage value is the projected value that the asset, or your car, for example, will realize on its sale at the end of its useful life. So this is based on the premise that when you buy a car, it's never going to be worth $0. It doesn't matter how long you have it, you'll always be able to sell it for some amount of money. We also use the term residual value interchangeably with salvage value. And residual value basically is the scrap value at the end of the useful life. Really, the only small difference is when you finish using your asset, if you were to scrap it, sell it to a junkyard, what would it be worth? But really, salvage value and residual value are used interchangeably. Finally, we have something called useful life. You heard me mention that term just a minute ago. The useful life is the estimated time period an asset is expected to be used from the time it is available for use to the time of its disposal or the termination of use. So depending upon what kind of asset you have, it may have a different useful life. The IRS defines useful life for tax purposes, and GAAP, which is generally accepted accounting principles, defines useful life for accounting purposes for businesses. Just so that we can be somewhat consistent, cars have a useful life of 5 years. Okay. Let's look at some examples. On January 1, 2011, a company purchased a vehicle that cost $20,000. It was to have a value of $5,000 at the end of 4 years. So that would be considered the residual value or the scrap value or the salvage value. What we want to do is calculate depreciation expense on the vehicle for the year ended December 31st, 2011. So basically, we want to calculate 1 year's worth of depreciation. January 1, 2011 to December 31st, 2011 is 1 year of depreciation. So we need to set up an equation. So let's talk about how we could do that. In order to find depreciation using the straight line method, we always start off with the asset's cost. Once we have the asset cost, we subtract from that the salvage value, what it would be worth after its useful life. Okay, once we do that, now we have the value of the asset that we are going to depreciate over time. So in order to have even amounts of depreciation, remember we said that straight line is a uniform amount. It is the same amount every year. Then we need to divide by the useful life. In this situation, it tells us, though, that the useful life on this is 4 years. So we would, in this situation, divide by 4 years. So we have our equation, the useful life. Let's actually erase this. Put that first. So I would write this down in your notes because we'll be looking at other methods as well. So we're going to divide by the useful life in years, our cost minus our salvage value divided by our useful life in years. Let's go ahead and do this problem. The cost of this vehicle was $20,000. It had a salvage value of $5,000, so we would subtract that. And we would divide then by the useful life in years, which is 4 years. 20,000 minus 5,000 would give us 15,000. Divided by 4 years will give us $3,750 of depreciation each year. So this is a good way to gauge how much your vehicle is worth. If you have a vehicle that you're purchasing for a business that you're going to use with business, this is how you could depreciate it for accounting purposes. So let's look and see at the end of 2011, it says calculate depreciation expense. Well, our depreciation expense after 1 year would just be $3,750. All right, let's look at a more detailed example. And let's look at something that's called partial period depreciation. And when do we use this? We use this when we don't buy a vehicle on January 1. So if we buy a vehicle on a different month, we have a partial period depreciation, meaning that we can't depreciate our vehicle over the entire 12 months. So let's look at how we might calculate that. In this example, we have purchased a vehicle on April 1st of 2014, and you're going to use it for business, and you purchased it for $28,000. It is expected to have a value of $3,000 at the end of 5 years. We want to calculate depreciation expense and the value of the vehicle for each useful year of the vehicle's life, which means we'll calculate it each year 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So what I've done is I've created a table here where on the left side I have my year, my depreciation per year. This A/D stands for accumulated depreciation. All this column does is keep track of the total depreciation from the very start. And then the final column here is the book value of the vehicle. That means that's the remaining value after we take depreciation off. So let's go ahead and set up our equation to calculate our first year of depreciation. Here's my calculation. I have my cost, $28,000, minus my salvage value of $3,000, divided by the useful life of $5,000. Well, $28,000 minus $3,000 is $25,000, and $25,000 divided by 5 is going to give me $5,000 per year. However, remember that in our first year, we didn't own the vehicle for the whole year. We only owned it from April to December. So how many months is that? That's 9 months. So I owned it 9 months out of 12. So what I want to do is I just want to take a fraction of the 5,000. I want to take 9 out of 12 months depreciation. So in my calculator, I can reduce 9 out of 12. 3 goes into 9 3 times, and 3 goes into 12 4 times. So this is 3/4 of this, or 75%. Let's go ahead and calculate that. I can take 5,000, and remember that 5,000 is the same thing as 5,000 over 1. So I could multiply straight across. 5,000 times 3, and then 1 times 4 is 4. So I would have 15,000 divided by 4. Another way that I could do it is I could take, 5,000 or 15,000. I could take the 5,000 times 75% because we know that 3 over 4 or 3/4 is the same thing as 75%. So in this example, in my first year, I will only depreciate $3,750 worth. Here's my depreciation for year one. My accumulated depreciation at this point is still only $3,750. That's all my vehicle has gone down in value. So my book value started off at $28,000. I have to subtract $3,750. If we start at $28,000, then we would subtract our depreciation of $3,750 to give us a book value at the end of year one of $24,250. Okay, now it's going to be very straightforward. My depreciation in year two, well, I had it the entire year, so I would take the full depreciation of $5,000. That means my accumulated is going to be the $3,750 plus the $5,000 to give me $8,750. Well, now I need to subtract $5,000 from $24,250. So I can just subtract $5,000, and now my book value is down to $19,250. Same for years 3, 4, and 5. Here's my table all filled out. First year, I only depreciated 75% of the total depreciation, and then each year after that, I depreciated 100%, 100%, all the way to 5 years. So why do I have a 6th year here? Why do we have an extra year when their years, the useful life, should only be 5 years? Well, hopefully you're looking at year one and saying, well, we didn't actually depreciate it for the full year. We only depreciated 75% of the year. So that means we still have to make up that extra 25%, and that would be in year 6. One thing I can do is I can take then 5,000 and I can multiply it by 1/4, or I can multiply it by 25%, and I should get 1,250. So my depreciation in my final year is only going to be 1,250. If I add that to my 23,750, I get an accumulated of $25,000. And now my book value is going to be another $1,250 less, so I get a book value of $3,000. All right, why isn't that 0? Shouldn't I have depreciated my vehicle all the way down to 0? Well, hopefully you remember that we have a salvage value of $3,000. It's expected to be worth $3,000 at the end of 5 years, at the end of its useful life. So I know I've depreciated it correctly when I get down to the end and my vehicle that I purchased is worth my salvage value. Okay, that concludes our lesson today on straight line depreciation. So hopefully at the end of this lesson, there's a couple things that you can do really well. You understand the terminology associated with depreciation, and then you can calculate the monthly depreciation under the straight line method. It's really very simple. And then based on that, you can calculate partial period depreciation. Now, one thing I didn't mention before was that if we had bought this vehicle on April 15th, I would still look at it as if I'd purchased it on April 1. So we'll go ahead and take the whole month, even if we purchase it somewhere in the middle of the month.